Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, we have the latest election results as polls are closing. Joe Biden aims to keep momentum as Bernie Sanders battles for delegates in the fight for the Democratic presidential nomination. Then the federal government grapples with the fallout from COVID-19. New York State sets up a containment zone, and more schools across the country send students home. Plus, coronavirus and the crown, to a United Kingdom preparing for the outbreak, where reactions range from the scrupulous to the skeptical.
Football's got to continue. You can't stop things. You cannot stop your way of living because of a virus that's only killed a few people at this moment in time.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
On a journey with American Cruise Lines, travelers experience the maritime heritage and culture of the Maine coast and New England islands. Our fleet of small cruise ships explore American landscapes, seaside villages, and historic harbors, where you can experience local customs and cuisine. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
Consumer Cellular offers no-contract wireless plans that are designed to help you do more of the things you enjoy. Whether you're a talker, texter, browser, photographer, or a bit of everything, our U.S.-based customer service team is here to find a plan that fits you. To learn more, go to consumercellular.tv.
BNSF Railway. Fidelity Investments.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
We have two big stories tonight. We will get to the latest on the coronavirus and the government's response to the spread across the U.S. But first, voters in 6 states went to the polls as the race for the Democratic nomination narrows between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Here are the results that we are able to share at this hour. In Michigan, the most contested state in this election tonight, Joe Biden now the projected winner. Polls have just closed in the state of Michigan. In Mississippi, Joe Biden also the projected winner. And in North Dakota, the caucus there closed an hour ago. The results still coming in, and voting continues for 2 more hours in Idaho and in Washington state. There is no question, though, that the state of Michigan is the crown jewel of this election night. Both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have put considerable time and resources toward the Great Lakes state, so that is where we will begin tonight. Christy McDonald has been following the Michigan primary. She's a reporter and anchor for our partners at Detroit Public TV. So, Christy, we are able to project that Joe Biden is the winner. What do you attribute it to? You've been following, you've been talking to voters throughout.
Yeah, this is really a blow for Bernie Sanders. He was trying to build on what he was able to do here in Michigan 4 years ago, Judy. But from the voters that we've been talking to in the last several weeks, and especially since we saw Super Tuesday, a lot of the candidates get out of the race and coalesce around Joe Biden was who is going to be able to beat Donald Trump in November. They share a lot of the same feelings the voters do about health care importance there, the economy, wage stagnation. But again, everyone is really rallying around the thought of we've had 3.5 years of a President Trump administration. Who can beat him in November?
Do you have an understanding, Christy, from talking to voters who supported Bernie Sanders 4 years ago when he did pull out a win over Hillary Clinton? It was narrow, but he won. What's happened to that support for him?
Well, what happened in 2016 in Michigan, it's a very different Michigan now in 2020. You've seen a flip in 2018. We took back 2 congressional seats, the Democrats did, and then you saw a Democratic governor come in, as well as Democratic Secretary of State and Attorney General. And so there has been a real shift in the mindset here, and it's really looking more towards electability. So when they say Joe Biden, he has been there through the test of time, he's been here a long time in the Democratic Party, is he going to be the one who's going to be able to take on Donald Trump and win and end a Trump presidency after 4 years? Bernie Sanders, while he, again, we talk about how many of the young demographic, the 18 to 35, are big supporters of Bernie Sanders, but he wasn't able to build upon that. He also has a lot of outreach for Hispanic voters and also for Muslim Americans who live here in the state of Michigan, but he wasn't able to expand upon that base.
Christy McDonald reporting for us from Detroit. Christy, thank you so much. And now on to Mississippi. It's the only southern state holding a contest today. Southern states that voted on Super Tuesday broke for Joe Biden over Bernie Sanders. And the Associated Press, as we said, is projecting tonight that Mississippi is following suit. Adam Ganeshow is following the primary there. He is a political reporter for the nonprofit newsroom at Mississippi Today. Adam, based on what you see, how do you explain the big win, evidently the big win for Joe Biden?
Sure. Like I said, earlier in the evening, Mississippi's Democratic primary electorate is close to 75% African American. African Americans in this state, because I think of their trust in former President Barack Obama, and because of that trust, their trust in former Vice President Joe Biden, I think that went a long way in this race. Looking at some exit polls that were conducted, it looks like Joe Biden got roughly 84% of the African American vote in Mississippi. So again, knowing that the African American electorate makes up 3/4 or close to 3/4 of that Democratic primary electorate, I think that kind of explains it all here.
It was interesting that Bernie Sanders had a campaign event scheduled in Mississippi, and he canceled it in order to head to Michigan.
That's right. Yeah. I think a lot of people in the state, when Senator Sanders decided to cancel that visit and instead go to Michigan, to try to pick up some of the heavy primary voters there. A lot of people in Mississippi resented that. They thought of that as sort of a disrespect in a lot of ways, and that certainly didn't help. I don't think any rise in Sanders' candidacy specifically within that African American community in Mississippi.
And we should say, Adam, that as much as Joe Biden may be celebrating about Mississippi tonight, it's a tough hill for him to climb in November when if he's the nominee up against President Trump.
That's right. Here in Mississippi, this is a ruby red state. It's one of President Trump's strongholds, of any state in the country. This is, like I said, a conservative state. We'll definitely in November, early November, we'll be having a conversation about just how well President Trump did here, undoubtedly. But look, I think there are still in Mississippi even there are moderate voters who may have not necessarily appreciated some of what President Trump has done in his first 3.5 years in office, and certainly as this year progresses, we'll see what happens. But sure, this is certainly a stronghold for President Trump, and that'll play out in November.
Adam Ganeshow with Mississippi Today. Thank you, Adam. And now to Missouri, one of the closest primary contests of the 2016 election cycle. Bernie Sanders lost the Democratic primary there to eventual nominee Hillary Clinton by less than half of a percentage point. Tonight, the Associated Press is projecting that Joe Biden will prevail over Sanders in Missouri this year. So Jason Rosenbaum has been following the contest, a political correspondent for St. Louis Public Radio. Jason, it's the show me state. What is it that Joe Biden showed to the voters?
He showed that Bernie Sanders' campaign for president may have ended tonight. And that may seem like hyperbole, but the fact that the Associated Press called Missouri within 2 or 3 minutes when it was only, as you mentioned, less than a half a percentage point in 2016 showcases that Sanders could not build on the coalition he had in 2016 and that voters in Missouri and other places that are considered either Midwestern or Southern states are going toward the former vice president's column. This is a huge triumph for Biden and a big psychological defeat for Bernie Sanders.
And we should say that this call was made with just, it looks like from what we were just showing there on the map, just 4% of the precincts reporting, but that means the interviews with voters today and in the days leading up to today's vote strongly suggest that Joe Biden is way out front. What were voters telling you, Jason, in the days leading up to the primary about what mattered to them the most as they cast their ballots?
It all came down to which candidate will stack up best against President Donald Trump. Missouri is probably not going to be the battleground state it was in 2000, 2004, 2008. But Missouri Democrats here need a better top of the ticket person than Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton was at the top of the ticket in 2016, she lost the state by nearly 20 percentage points, and that doomed down ballot candidates like Chris Koster for governor and Jason Kander for Senate. People like State Auditor Nicole Galloway, who's going to be running in a competitive race for governor against incumbent Governor Mike Parson, need someone like Joe Biden to close that gap in order to win. So even though Missouri is not the battleground it used to be, the result tonight, I think, is heartening for a lot of Missouri Democrats.
Jason Rosenbaum, St. Louis Public Radio, we thank you.
Thank you.
And all the way out west to Washington State, where voters are still able to submit their ballots for a little more than an hour and a half. It has the second biggest pot of delegates up for grabs on this election night. And Donna Blankenship is keeping track of the primary there. She is the political editor at KCTS 9 Crosscut. That is the PBS member station based in Seattle. Donna, when you and I spoke earlier this evening, you were telling me about what voters were confronted with. It's a state with mail-in ballots. Earlier in this contest, you had a number of candidates running, most of whom have dropped out, presenting a dilemma for a lot of voters.
Right. I just talked to a bunch of voters yesterday, and they said that they had to make their second or third choice when they ended up voting. Some of them voted before the candidates dropped out. So that's why our pollster thinks, one of the reasons our pollster thinks that Joe Biden is probably going to win this election in Washington.
And we also have spoken, Donna, about the fact that Washington State had caucuses as well as a primary beauty contest 4 years ago. This year is just the primary. How does that affect, do you think, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders in this contest?
Well, it gives us a wider view of what the voters in Washington are thinking. The caucuses attracted a small, select group of voters, and the primary has always been more people showing up. That means that Washington, which has a variety of Democrats in our state, will all their voices will be heard this time. So it's more likely, I'd just be speculating, I guess, that the tendency is to go toward more moderate choice. That's probably why Hillary Clinton won the primary last time around 4 years ago, and Bernie Sanders won the caucuses.
Donna Blankenship with KCTS, thank you. We know you and all your colleagues dealing so much these days with the coronavirus outbreak, which has hit Washington State so hard. Donna, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
And now to look at what it all means for the big 2020 picture, I'm here with Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report and host of Public Radio's Politics with Amy Walter and our own Lisa Desjardins. So hello to both of you. You had all of, 10 minutes to digest all of this. Amy, what is it all up to? Three big calls already for Joe Biden.
Right. There was a tidal wave that started on Super Tuesday for Joe Biden. The question was, could that wave keep coming in for him? And the answer, obviously, is yes. And it is propelled by his big wins in almost every single demographic category.
And what does that mean, Lisa?
Well, I mean, I think we're seeing him win urban, suburban, rural, men, women, black, white so far tonight. I also want to give us an update on the delegate count, where we are right now with these races called. Right now, Joe Biden, the former vice president, has, according to our count, 715 delegates. Bernie Sanders, 584. Of course, both a long way off from the 1991, but it is that trajectory, the margins that Biden is stacking up that make it harder for Bernie Sanders.
So those are the numbers of delegates you expect Biden Biden to have at the end of this evening. Is that right?
I believe including the calls that we've made right now, as of right now.
Including the calls.
The statewide.
Right now. Yeah. But Amy, when you say winning every voter group, right, including young people, which has been Bernie Sanders.
He hasn't won young people. Here's a statistic I think is really important. Looking at Missouri, a state that, as you pointed out, was very, very close last time. Hillary Clinton narrowly winning it. In 2016, young voters made up 45% of the electorate, according to the exit polls. This year, the Associated Press voter survey, young voters are only 37%. Bernie Sanders winning them by 24%. That's a big number, but he won them by 33% in 2016. Older voters, I hate that they call everybody over 45 older, by the way, but anyway, voters over the age of 45 make up almost 2/3 of the electorate. And look at how big of a win Joe Biden there, more than 50 points. So losing younger voters, but not by as big of a margin as he's winning older voters.
A lot of ways to slice and dice this electorate. Lisa, what else are you looking at here?
Oh, I think watching Michigan is going to be fascinating, not just for this primary race, but of course for November. What does the Democratic coalition look like? Can they beat Trump in that state?
For sure, for sure. I'm looking at graphics in front of you that are all about urban and rural, and there's so much to look at. Lisa Desjardins, Amy Walter, thank you both.
Welcome.
And we would ask you to please join us at 11 p.m. Eastern for our special live coverage of these election results as they continue to come in. On the COVID-19 front tonight, the U.S. death toll rises to 30, with more than 800 confirmed cases. That is up more than 1/3 from yesterday. Officials order new cancellations, closures, and quarantines. Congress and the president huddle on softening the economic blow. The Biden and Sanders campaigns cancel rallies tonight in Ohio. And the stock market recovers half of its losses from a day earlier. Amna Nawaz begins our coverage.
After Monday's steep sell-off, signs of recovery on Wall Street as investors reacted to new efforts to slow the spread of COVID-19. In New York, some of the strongest measures yet.
It is a dramatic action, but it is the largest cluster in the country.
Governor Andrew Cuomo sent the National Guard into New Rochelle outside of New York City and closed schools and businesses in a 1-mile radius for 2 weeks.
New Rochelle has more than double the number of cases of New York City. I mean, it is true. It's a phenomenon.
Also today, North Carolina joined Colorado in imposing a statewide emergency. In all, more than 2/3 of states in the U.S. now have confirmed cases of the novel coronavirus, with the majority in Washington state. In Olympia, Governor Jay Inslee warned that more cases are coming, raising the risk for seniors.
And remind them that this is not a time to be exposing themselves to large groups of people in confined spaces.
And in Oakland, California, some 2,000 passengers waited in turn to leave the docked Grand Princess cruise ship and enter quarantine. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., President Trump met with insurance executives and pledged to help the struggling airline and cruise industries. Later, he met with lawmakers on Capitol Hill as they weigh any legislative next steps, still days from coming together.
Well, there are going to be a number of different things considered in putting together this package, which, as I said before, I hope ends up being a bipartisan, bicameral, negotiated way forward that will reassure others.
This should not be a partisan issue. We want to solve the problem. We're ready to work with the administration on a coordinated, government-wide focused plan to respond to the coronavirus.
Among the options under consideration, payroll tax relief, help for hourly wage workers, and making testing and treatment more affordable. The president also addressed questions about his own health after contact with lawmakers now under self-quarantine.
I feel extremely good. I feel very good. But I guess it's not a big deal to get tested, and something I would do. But again, spoke to the White House doctor, terrific guy, talented guy. He said he sees no reason to do it. There's no symptoms, no anything.
One of those lawmakers, Republican Representative Mark Meadows of North Carolina, tapped to be White House Chief of Staff. He was exposed to the virus at a Washington area conference last week and announced he would self-isolate as a precaution, even though he tested negative. The availability of testing kits led to questions today in a hearing with the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Any physician that feels there's a need or public health person can order that test. But it was a series of going through that regulatory process to get that test available.
But I think the conclusion is that we are behind the curve in testing when South Korea can test 10,000 people in a day.
Overseas, the streets of Rome lay quiet as a nationwide travel ban took effect in Italy, hard hit by the virus.
This was the best thing the government could do because people were not respecting the rules. A stronger decision was needed to counter this situation.
At train stations, masked police officers checked documents for all passengers who had to justify their travel. Poland announced health checks for travelers crossing its border from Germany, and Austria conducted similar checks along its border with Italy. In China, President Xi Jinping toured Wuhan, the epicenter of the original outbreak, and said the worst there was over.
I extend greetings and thanks to you and to all the community workers nationwide, including those fighting on the front line.
And in South Korea, the number of new cases fell to its lowest level in almost 2 weeks. Back in the U.S., the markets endured ups and downs, but finished the day higher, despite the uncertainty of where the virus will move next. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Amna Nawaz.
In the end, Wall Street recovered about half of its record losses from Monday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 1,167 points to close back above 25,000. The Nasdaq rose nearly 400 points, and the S&P 500 added 135. All of this as hopes build for a major economic stimulus package from Washington. We get more now on the federal government's response with our Lisa Desjardins and Yamiche Alcindor. So, Yamiche, to you first, what are the options that the president is looking at? What are you hearing at the White House?
Well, the president is looking for the fastest possible economic response to the coronavirus. And he's looking at 2 tracks. First, what he can do individually through some sort of national emergency declaration in the next week or so. And he's also looking at working with Congress and negotiating some sort of larger legislative bill on what he can do himself. He's looking at some sort of executive action where he would be able to do a couple things, including giving small businesses loans. He also wants to try to give some sort of financial relief to hourly workers that have already lost paychecks because they had to self-quarantine or because they had the coronavirus. The other thing he's looking at is trying to defer tax payments so that if you owe the government money, you might have between 90 to 180 days to pay the government, which would put a little bit more money in your pocket short term. Then he's looking at Congress for a payroll tax cut that would be, some are saying between 2%. That would be what President Obama did in 2010. Larry Kudlow is in the White House right now briefing as I speak. He's saying that this would be something that would last through the end of the year. But the president is gearing up for a fight with Democrats on the Hill because some Democrats are already saying that this is a tax cut that looks something like possibly the 2017 tax cut that they say benefited the wealthy people and not working class individuals. So the president is looking at 2 things to try to figure out how to stem the economic issues that are coming with this virus.
So, Lisa, it's true that there are some different ideas in the Congress.
Right. Yamiche and I were team reporting on the Hill today, and I think we can safely say that there are a lot of ideas, but not yet a clear focus. Democrats and some Republicans are skeptical of this payroll tax cut because that payroll tax comes and helps Social Security and Medicare. Seems to be warming up today, but that kind of 2% cut would be over $100 billion in spending. Marco Rubio told me he thinks this whole package could be $300 billion if it's a larger payroll tax cut. We're talking about very big dollars here, Judy. Other ideas floating today, Republicans, 3 of them, senators, raised the idea of including a highway infrastructure bill as part of this. That's something others think is not related at all. But if you're talking about economic stimulus, it enters the picture. The point here is that there are a lot of ideas. They don't yet have real handle on what exactly will help the workers who probably will need it the most.
Well, no doubt, Yamiche, the White House trying to deal with concerns, rising concerns on the part of the American people and fears. I mean, the death toll is going up. The number of cases is going up exponentially.
That's right. And White House officials just now said that it's guaranteed that the numbers of deaths and the number of cases in coronavirus will be going up. Now, today, President Trump, when he was visiting the Hill, was playing sort of calmer in chief. Here's what he had to say.
We're prepared and we're doing a great job with it, and it will go away. Just stay calm. It will go away. We want to protect our shipping industry, our cruise industry, cruise ships. We want to protect our airline industry, very important. But everybody has to be vigilant and has to be careful. But be calm. It's really working out.
So there again is the president trying to be calmer in chief. He's trying to tell people, calm down, take a deep breath, things are going to get better. But of course, the issue is, of course, that the president has contradicted some of the health officials working for his own administration. He said at one point that there was going to be a miracle, that the cases were going to go down. He was on Capitol Hill today shaking hands, which is what health officials have said Americans should try not to do. They should be washing their hands very vehemently and very frequently. But the president has been saying other things. But today he did acknowledge that the cases will go up. But when he was asked about the cases possibly reaching to 100 million Americans infected, he didn't tamper that down. Instead, he said, I've seen a lot of different numbers, and I'm just telling people the risks continue to be low.
So, Lisa, right now, what is it, 7 members of Congress have been under quarantine. How is the Capitol doing in terms of dealing with
that? Again, is a very mixed picture. When you talk to senators, some of them were even joking about this. I spoke to Senator Pat Roberts in his 80s, said, I'd like to self-quarantine at Mar-a-Lago. So they're trying, in some sense, to walk this line of not increasing panic, but also many staffers, Judy, say they're not taking this seriously enough at the Capitol. While I saw some senators using their elbow to hit an elevator button, the truth is they're not really changing their patterns very much. There are a fewer handshakes, some travel, like going to NATO next week. Some senators are not going there. But there are more serious considerations going on as well, Judy. I can report from multiple sources that the Sergeant-at-Arms at the Senate is looking at trying to find an alternate location should the Capitol itself be seen as not a healthy place for senators to meet. That is normal in this kind of situation, but that tells you how high the issue has risen at this point.
Interesting, in the wake of Speaker Pelosi saying we're going to keep going no matter what.
They just want a backup plan. And also want to note quickly on the Biden and Sanders campaign canceling their events in Ohio. That is because Ohio announced their first cases of coronavirus today. Joe Biden, we expect to speak in Philadelphia instead tonight. So this is having that political effect that we expected.
For sure. Lisa Desjardins, Yamiche Alcindor, thank you. A small but growing number of schools around the country are shutting their doors to try to stem the spread of the coronavirus. That includes a number of colleges and universities. It is just a fraction of public elementary and high schools. But so far, more than 620 schools have closed or are scheduled to close, affecting more than 430,000 students. Washington State was the early epicenter in the U.S., and John Yang has a look at one of the school districts there that has decided to take this step.
The North Shore School District, north of Seattle in Washington State, has shifted all its classes for its more than 23,500 students from brick and mortar classrooms to the internet for at least 2 weeks. Michelle Reed is the superintendent of the North Shore School District. She joins us from Seattle. Superintendent Reed, thanks so much for being with us. In your letter to parents explaining this decision, you said that we are no longer able to provide quality instruction and maintain an environment that is safe for our staff and students to learn. What led you to that conclusion?
Well, there were several issues. North Shore is uniquely situated with 2 counties and 3 cities. And within our 2 counties, we have the highest number of coronavirus identified cases and deaths in the United States. We also had a significant number of staff that met the 4 criteria for at-risk, so I really could no longer safely open and operate school without quality staff supporting the educational process in a brick-and-mortar campus. We also had escalating absentee rates up to 20% just prior to us making the decision to transition school from the classroom to the cloud. It's our first day. We were only at 500 students not able to log in. Therefore, we actually are at a 2% absence rate.
How does this actually work? Students log in on their computers at home, and what happens?
So it's an online platform we're utilizing, so we actually have a daily schedule for students, and there are times that they log in for classes and their discussion boards, and the teachers have been working really hard, and our support professionals, to provide lessons and content that is sent in some cases by video and others by attached documents and discussion boards, so that we're able to maintain our North Shore quality of education during this health crisis.
Was there an issue with students who didn't have a computer or didn't have internet service at home?
Absolutely. We are a district that has a lot of resources that not all communities and districts have. We've received approximately 4,000 requests for computer devices and about 300 requests for mobile hotspots, which we've been able to meet. And I also think it underscores a broader national conversation about equity and access to technology and the internet, and students' access dependent still on their zip code in this country. So hopefully when this health crisis passes, it's a conversation we can take up in earnest.
In your letter to the parents, you also said that education is a service, it is not a place. But there are certain things that are provided at that place, that the service is usually provided. For instance, I know that 15% of your students qualify for free or reduced lunches. You obviously have students who have special needs. And there are certain families that have childcare issues during the day for younger students in particular. What happens, or what are you doing about those students?
Well, so let me be clear that overriding all of those concerns are the health and safety of our students and staff and our ability to slow the spread of this coronavirus, whereas social distancing has been the recommendation #1 for us. Having said that, we have gotten a team together and we are providing food today to those students who have asked for food. We're doing it at 4 brick and mortar sites and also delivering to 16 remote school sites. So all students and families who want or need food or rely on the schools for food are able to procure food. The same with childcare. We're going to be supporting community sites for childcare for those families who require it, as long as we can maintain that in a healthy and safe way. So we're trying to continue to provide those services while we take care of our professional educators and support staff and students by keeping them safe with a social distancing plan.
You said that this is initially going to be for 2 weeks. At the end of the 2 weeks, how do you decide whether to go back to the brick and mortar classroom?
We're going to be evaluating that on a day-to-day basis. We'll continue to look at our data and the fact pattern locally and nationally, and we'll make those decisions as they come. Our ability to move from classroom to cloud and back is going to enable us to continue to be nimble in our decision-making, and we're providing parents, daily communication as well as students.
Michelle Reed, Superintendent of the North Shore School District in Washington State. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A federal appeals court has ordered the U.S. Justice Department to hand over grand jury testimony from the special counsel's Russia investigation. A 3-judge panel ruled 2-1 today that House Democrats are entitled to the material as part of continuing investigations of President Trump. The case could end up before the U.S. Supreme Court. In Moscow, Russia's parliament laid out a path today for President Vladimir Putin to stay in power. Existing law requires him to step down when his latest 6-year term ends in 2024. But lawmakers approved a constitutional amendment to change that. Putin welcomed the move.
Technically, today we could lift the presidential term limits. Such precedents exist in other countries, including our neighbors. In principle, this option would be possible if the Constitutional Court gives an official ruling that such an amendment would not contradict the principles and main provisions of the Constitution.
Putin is 67 years old. He has been Russia's leader for more than 20 years. If voters approve the proposed constitutional amendment next month, he could stay in power until 2036. The U.S. general who's overseeing the Middle East warned today that Taliban attacks on Afghan forces have to let up, or U.S. forces may not withdraw as agreed. Marine General Frank McKenzie said the militants must keep their part of a bargain that calls for cutting U.S. troop levels from 13,000 to about 8,600 by summer. He spoke at a U.S. House hearing that was live streamed.
They are continuing attacks. Those attacks are relatively low in scale. They are not directed against coalition forces. They are not occurring in city centers. They are occurring at isolated checkpoints, but those attacks are occurring, and they are not consistent with a movement toward a negotiated settlement.
Meanwhile, Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani signed a decree for the release of 1,500 Taliban prisoners. It is to begin within 4 days. And retired Army General Jack Keane received the Presidential Medal of Freedom today, the nation's highest civilian honor. President Trump presented the medal in a White House ceremony. Keane had once served as the Army's Vice Chief of Staff. Still to come on the NewsHour, after Brexit, The United Kingdom prepares for its next crisis, the coronavirus, and much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
We return now to COVID-19 and to Britain, where so far the virus has killed 6 people there. 370 people are infected and quarantined. The British government is watching developments in Italy amid fears that levels of infection could rise dramatically and soon. But as special correspondent Malcolm Brabant reports, for the time being, the attitude in Britain is very much keep calm and carry on.
God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen. Now, I haven't suddenly become super patriotic because of Brexit, but I'm following to the letter the instructions from Britain's Prime Minister.
The best single thing we can do is wash our hands, 2 verses of the national anthem or happy birthday, hot water, bar of soap. We're going to do 2 verses.
After winning the general election 3 months ago, Boris Johnson's main leadership challenge was to negotiate post-Brexit trade deals. But now his premiership is being tested by war with an invisible enemy that threatens both the health and wealth of the nation.
If we continue to look out for one another, to pull together in a united and national effort, I have no doubt that we can and will rise to that challenge.
Currently, the government is trying to contain the virus and has postponed measures such as establishing exclusion zones to delay its spread. But more stringent controls are coming, says Chris Whitty, the government's chief medical advisor.
So we are now very close to the time, probably within the next 10 to 14 days, when the modelling would imply we should move to a situation where we say everybody who has even minor respiratory tract infections or a fever should be self-isolating for 7 days afterwards.
That means anyone with a cough or cold will be obliged to stay home. The government has guaranteed that sick pay will kick in from day 1 instead of the usual day 4. But what about financially vulnerable groups?
How do you self-isolate if you're in precarious employment? How do you self-isolate if you're too poor to have sufficient stocks of food in the house?
Sociologist Robert Dingwall advises the government on morality and the ethics of its emergency planning.
Essentially, if the government is going to ask people to self-isolate, the government has to take responsibility for the consequences of that. And that's in terms of ensuring that those people have an income, that they have access to food, they have access to other services that they might need during that period of self-isolation. You can't just ask for the self-isolation on its own.
For now, Britain has decided not to follow Italy, where soccer matches have taken place in empty stadiums. At Derby County, attendance at the latest game was above average. The club's mascot was tactile, despite advice to reduce human contact. Here, 130 miles north of London, characteristic British stoicism was on prominent display.
Football's got to continue. You can't stop things. You cannot stop your way of living because of a virus that's only killed a few people at this moment in time.
For me, the media are just blowing it all out of proportion. They're making a mountain out of a molehill. They're causing people to panic buy and, yeah, for me, I'm not worried.
I know with me being older, you see, they're talking about stopping older people from coming because they're more vulnerable to it. But, well, I've had all sorts over my life. If I've got to go, I've got to go.
People are starting to panic. When we went to Sainsbury's yesterday, you couldn't buy a toilet roll. People are stockpiling already. What does it say about Britain? Well, we're going to panic mode too easily, I think.
The latest British obsession with hoarding toilet paper puzzles some, because the virus impacts the respiratory and not other systems. The disappearance of hand sanitizers from shelves is more understandable. Retailers have insisted that they have enough supplies and will restock, but shoppers don't appear reassured.
I hate that phrase, panic buying.
Sir Simon Wesley is a leading psychiatrist and expert in mass hysteria. He's one of the behavioural scientists advising the government how to best handle the crisis.
You would have to be an idiot not to go and get essential supplies, toilet paper, dog food, etc. I've done both of those myself. So this isn't panic buying. This is a rational decision by people thinking I might be stuck in my house for 14 days.
But in an age of individualism, of diminishing community spirit, coupled with scepticism of authority figures, could the public revolt against future tougher measures?
In general, I think the public have already shown that they will follow instructions so long as they understand them, so long as they're given clearly, and so long as the purpose is there, particularly if instead of frightening people that if you don't, we will send you to prison or fine you, but actually if you do this, you are helping the common good, you are protecting your relatives, you are protecting the sick and the vulnerable.
Britain's royal family is playing its part. There was no handshaking at Westminster Abbey for a service notable as the last official engagement of Prince Harry and his American wife Meghan Markle, who are withdrawing from royal duties. The Queen's heir, Prince Charles, proffered an Eastern greeting. But for such gatherings to continue, Britain needs to amend the lyrics of its national anthem to still send her victorious, but over a new foe. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Malcolm Brabant in London.
Students of today's politics are often looking for echoes in history that inform our present. A new book explores a chapter in American history with relevance to today that you may not know very much about. It is the story of how the illegitimate son of an immigrant rose to become the Republican Party's first presidential nominee in 1856, with a lot of help from his wife. Lisa Desjardins has the latest edition of NewsHour Bookshelf.
In the mid-1840s, the United States was undergoing immense transformation, expanding its borders into the uncharted West in what was characterized as America's manifest destiny. A new book explores that era through the story of John C. Fremont, a wilderness explorer turned politician, and his wife Jessie. Together, they became the country's first celebrity power couple. The book is Imperfect Union: How Jessie and John Fremont Mapped the West, Invented Celebrity, and Helped Cause the Civil War. And it's by NPR's Steve Inskeep. That's quite a lot in a subtitle.
It's a long title, but they had long lives and fascinating lives and were at the center of American history for a couple of decades that I focus on in the 1840s and 50s, this period leading up to the Civil War.
But I'm curious, why do a book about both of them?
Because they were a team. John C. Fremont was a Western explorer. He didn't actually discover that much that was new. His accomplishment was making the West more famous and making it seem more alluring. And so he'd go back and write these best-selling accounts of his adventures, but he would write them in collaboration with his wife, Jessie Benton Fremont. She was the daughter of a senator who wanted to be involved in politics in a way that women weren't supposed to be involved in politics. And she operated through her husband and became a major political player. She is in some ways almost more interesting than he is.
I want to talk about the decisions that John was making on the trail. He made several voyages out into the West, as you say. Not all of this was undiscovered territory, but harrowing journeys nonetheless. He risked many lives. Sometimes he expended lives on his journey. And I'd be interested if you could read one of the excerpts.
Yeah, this is after one of his nearly catastrophic decisions. John C. Fremont was in what was called the Oregon Country. He decided the middle of winter would be a perfect time to find a new trail across the American West.
Of course.
And his men got lost, they got stuck. Fremont had risked his men's lives with little need, much as when he climbed the highest point in the Rocky Mountains, which is another thing that he had done that was a needless exploit for fame, really. He'd done the same thing except on a grander scale. Again, he got away with it as persistence and endurance overcame his erratic decisions. The experience shifted the orientation of his life, because fate had momentarily brought him to California, a great stage where he sensed there would be more acts for him to play. He accidentally discovered California. And I don't mean discovered it like the first person to go there. I mean, he himself realized what it was, realized its potential, and resolved to return, and ended up being seen as the conqueror, the American conqueror of Mexican California a couple of years later.
There's so much in this book, but I do want to come back to the center of Jesse.
Yeah.
You know, his wife, Jessie Fremont. Can you tell me a little bit more about how she managed to make him a national hero and then catapult herself into a limelight like women had never been in before?
Yeah, it's an amazing story. She was ambitious from a very young age, and she said, my father early gave me a place a boy would have had, and she would follow him hunting and follow him to the Senate. There was a point when she grew up where this was no longer seen as appropriate. She eloped with this young, penniless Army lieutenant, this adventurous lieutenant, and she would receive his letters from the West, and she would put it in the newspaper and publicize what he was doing. After a while, she was writing letters herself that would get published in the newspaper, and this immediately began to publicize her. People would notice and comment that a woman was commenting on politics.
You also wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and you entitled it, "It's 1856 All Over Again. I am intrigued. How and what can we learn?"
One thing that is similar now and then is that the nation in the 1850s was undergoing a great demographic change. The country was divided in a way that can feel familiar to us. The division then was between northern states and southern states. Northern states that had gradually abolished slavery, and southern states that had ever more fervently embraced slavery. That was the big divide. And the demographic change was that the North was becoming much, much more populous, which in a democratic country means the North was becoming more and more powerful. The reason that should feel familiar today is we are again going through a great demographic change that is seen as benefiting one party, the Democrats, a little bit more than the other party, the Republicans, and that can be destabilizing. It creates fears on one side that they will be overwhelmed and not just lose an election, but lose forever. And this is something that President Trump told his supporters when running for office in 2016. He would tell them, this is your last chance to save the country before we're overwhelmed by immigrants. Now we have Democrats who fear being shut out of power forever because of the way the president governs the country in what they see as an authoritarian manner. And that is something that leads to extreme politics when people feel the stakes are so very, very high. They are high now, just as people felt they were very, very high back then.
A time of high stakes, a very interesting look at the past, and as you say, a little bit of present as well. Steve Inskeep, thank you so much. Your book, Imperfect Union. We appreciate you talking with us.
Thanks for reading.
Now, take a moment to hear from your local PBS station. It's a chance to offer your support, which helps to keep programs like ours on the air. Rural America has experienced a rebound of sorts in recent years, and many point to an unexpected reason: the arts. Jeffrey Brown has this encore report for our ongoing arts and culture series, Canvas.
Friday night hot jazz. But we're not in a flashy club in New York. This is the VFW in the town of Grand Rapids in northern Minnesota. On the guitar, Sam Miltich, who grew up here and has performed in hundreds of venues around the world. But this small stage is home.
People thought I was kind of crazy to try and make a life as a jazz musician in northern Minnesota.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, it does sound a little crazy.
It does sound a little crazy,
Yeah.
and actually maybe it is a little bit crazy. But the quality of life where I grew up was just so high. And I was like acutely aware of how good that life was, and I wanted that life.
And he's not alone, as we saw in the nearby Performing Arts Center that played host to a recent Rural Arts and Culture Summit. The summit is a biennial event held in different towns. This one brought together some 350 artists and community leaders from 25 states. to exchange ideas, celebrate the role of creativity in small towns, and fight a national narrative about rural America in decline.
That's a pretty simple way to tell that story. And I think underlying that story is often this attitude of sort of, well, why don't you just get over it? Or why don't you just move? I think that kind of ignores the history and the complexity, and it often ignores all of the people who are working really hard to make what's next for that community.
Laura Zabel heads Springboard for the Arts, a Minnesota group that helps artists and organizations in both urban and rural areas, and puts on the summit.
Where do you see the arts fitting in? What's the role of arts and artists?
They sort of have this ability to make meaning sometimes from the really hard parts of what it means to live in a rural community right now. And I think that's necessary for a community to move forward, that rather than just telling people get over it, people need outlets for their pain and their shame and their joy.
I work for another organization.
The summit focuses on the practical side of succeeding in rural areas. There are consultations for legal aid, economic planning, and career advice. With a dream of being a professional dancer, Molly Johnston left her hometown of Battle Lake, Minnesota, with a population of less than 1,000, for college in Philadelphia. She remembers thinking she wouldn't return until retirement.
I was the first one out of town after graduation, ready to explore the world.
But family and lifestyle pulled her back to Battle Lake. The problem, how to make it work as a dancer.
I'm creating opportunities that didn't exist in the first place. So it's not like
In what sense? I mean, explain that to me.
Well, I mean, there's no dance studio in Battle Lake, for instance. So I can't just walk in and be like, hey, I have my master's in dance. Can you give me a job and a weekly paycheck?
So she and a colleague created their own organization, Dance Barn Collective, to put on a festival and give opportunities to those living in rural communities. She also teaches dance classes to make ends meet.
We're becoming part of our town's makeup, that when they see that Dance Barn is doing a pop-up show at the bar on Thursday night, people show up. I think that's something really beautiful and surprising about living in a rural town.
There are dozens and dozens of local artists.
Jay Arrowsmith Decoux came to the summit with a different perspective as mayor of Grand Marais, Minnesota, a small town of about 1,300 people that sits on Lake Superior near the Canadian border. It's a town that's long valued the arts, he says, but is now making them part of its planning and policies, like incorporating artists and creative design into the reconstruction of a local highway.
The idea is, if you can at least consider art when you're working on any policy, then you won't create barriers to the development of art in your community.
Everyone here acknowledges the challenges of making a life in art in a small town, earning enough income, housing, finding an audience.
There's a lot of this that is that's uncomfortable for us.
Amber Buckanaga has faced those and other challenges firsthand. A member of the Leech Lake Band of Chippewa, she lives in East Lake on the reservation and works as a fashion designer, incorporating traditional patterns into contemporary clothing. But lack of access to proper equipment and technology are a constraint. The Wi-Fi in her area, she says, isn't worth paying for.
We do have those challenges, and then on top of us being Indigenous people, it becomes more challenging. The access that the non-Indigenous population has to art spaces and resources, it's there right in front of them, and it comes to them, and people feel more comfortable inviting them to those things. So.
And you don't have that network?
No, we just don't have that.
Here in Grand Rapids, where the massive paper mill and the crucial timber industry have struggled, an arts community has blossomed. There's a gallery and small shops, pop-ups in the beautifully restored old schoolhouse, an art walk on the first Friday of each month. And jazz guitarist Sam Miltich, a full-time musician, is a regular at the VFW. With grants from a state sales tax fund for arts and culture, he's able to bring musicians from urban areas to play with him in Grand Rapids. Miltich says he feels a sense of mission.
I think someone dubbed the term jazz ambassador of the North or some such thing.
Yeah.
You know, and I've always...
Which you embrace.
Which I embrace.
Yeah.
And I've always felt, I think it's a little bit of an equity thing, where I always have felt that rural people are every bit as deserving of art as any other group, and maybe more so because they don't have as much access to it. So it's about providing access.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in Grand Rapids, Minnesota.
And now for an update on the results of this 6-state primary election night, which is shaping up to give another big boost to Joe Biden. In Michigan, the most contested state of the night, with 125 delegates at stake, Biden is the projected winner. In Missouri, a key state in the general election, Biden also the projected winner. In Mississippi, the only state in the South voting today, Biden again is projected to win. In North Dakota, the results are still coming in, and voting continues for another hour in Idaho and in Washington state. At this hour, Joe Biden has 774 delegates to 620 for Bernie Sanders. Biden now has more than a third of the delegates needed to capture the nomination. Please stay with us for the latest results and tune in at 11 p.m. Eastern for our NewsHour Live Election Special. Before then, on the NewsHour Online, we will have live stream coverage and analysis featuring Lisa Desjardins, other NewsHour reporters, plus insights from local public media around the country. That is live right now on our website, pbs.org/newshour. I'm Judy Woodruff. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by Fidelity Investments, American Cruise Lines, BNSF Railway, Consumer Cellular, Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and the advancement of international peace and security at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.